I'm Robert Thompson, 74 years old, and I'm a Vietnam veteran who spent 3 tours in the jungle fighting for my country, only to come home and fight a different kind of war with my own family. For the past 5 years, I've been making dinner, alone every single night, while my daughter Jessica and her husband managed my finances, claiming they were helping me stay organized. What I discovered last week when I finally checked my bank statements changed everything I thought I knew about the people I trusted most. My military pension checks, $3,147 every month for the past 5 years, had been deposited into an account I couldn't access, while they gave me a $200 weekly allowance and told me I was lucky to have their support. But what they didn't know was that this old soldier had been keeping records of everything, and I was about to show them what happens when you steal from someone who survived hell to earn that pension. Like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family who thought you were too old to fight back. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Every evening at exactly 5:30 p.m., I set one dinner plate on the small kitchen table in my 1-bedroom apartment, the same way I'd done for the past 5 years since Marie passed. The white ceramic plate, chipped slightly on one edge from years of use, had become a symbol of everything my life had become. Solitary, careful, and quietly desperate. Tonight's meal was the same as most nights. A can of soup heated on the stove, 2 slices of generic white bread, and a glass of water. No butter for the bread. That was a luxury I couldn't afford on my weekly allowance. No milk for calcium that my old bones needed. No fresh vegetables or fruit unless they were on sale, and I could squeeze them into my tight budget. As I sat down at that table for one, I couldn't help but remember the dinner table Marie and I used to share in our house on Maple Street. That table could seat 8 people comfortably, and during the holidays, we'd have every chair filled with family, friends, and neighbors. Marie would spend days preparing elaborate meals, and the house would fill with laughter, conversation, and the warmth that comes from people who genuinely care about each other. Jessica used to sit in the chair directly across from me, chattering about school, friends, and her dreams for the future. She'd been such a bright, caring child, always worried about others, and quick to help anyone in need. When she was 12, she organized a neighborhood car wash to raise money for a classmate, whose family had lost their home in a fire. "Dad," she'd said, "we have to help people who are hurting." Where was that compassionate girl now? Where was the daughter who used to call me her hero and brag to her friends about her father's military service? The apartment I lived in now was a far cry from the 3-bedroom house Marie and I had owned for 38 years. After she died, Jessica had convinced me that maintaining the house was too much work for a man my age. "Dad, you don't need all that space," she'd said, her voice full of concern that seemed genuine at the time. "Let us help you find something more manageable." More manageable. That's what my entire life had become under Jessica's management. Smaller, more controlled, more dependent on her decisions about what I could and couldn't afford. The kitchen in this apartment was barely large enough for one person to move around comfortably. The stove was old and temperamental, sometimes taking several tries to light the burners. The refrigerator was small and efficient, though it rarely contained much food, since I could only buy what my weekly allowance would stretch to cover. But it was the silence that hurt most. The absence of conversation, of shared stories, of someone asking about my day or telling me about theirs. Marie and I used to spend hours at our dinner table, talking about everything and nothing. She'd tell me about her day volunteering at the hospital auxiliary, and I'd share stories from my work at the hardware store where I'd been employed for 22 years after leaving the military. Now, the only sounds during dinner were the scraping of my spoon against the bowl, the ticking of the wall clock, and occasionally the television from the apartment next door. Sometimes I'd turn on the local news for background noise, but the constant stream of bad news only made me feel more isolated and forgotten. I finished my soup and carefully washed the single plate, bowl and spoon in the sink, even my dishwashing. Routine had become a meditation on solitude. No stack of plates from a family meal, no pots and pans from elaborate cooking, just the simple implements of a man eating alone. As I dried the dishes and put them away, I found myself wondering how it had come to this. How had I gone from being a respected veteran, a loving husband, and a proud homeowner, to being a man who counted pennies to afford soup and bread? But something was stirring in the back of my mind, a nagging suspicion that had been growing stronger. Each week, as I watched Jessica and her husband drive away in their expensive SUV after delivering my weekly allowance, the math just didn't add up. And after 3 tours in Vietnam and 40 years of civilian life, I'd learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. The Bronze Star Medal sits in a small wooden box on my dresser, the same place it's been for 52 years. Most people don't understand what this piece of metal and ribbon really represents, but I remember every detail of the day I earned it. March 15th, 1971, during my second tour in Vietnam, when everything went to hell in a place called Firebase. Charlie, I was 22 years old then, a staff sergeant with the 1st Infantry Division, leading a squad of 12 men who'd become my brothers in every way that mattered. We'd been in country for 7 months, long enough to lose the wide-eyed fear of new soldiers, but not long enough to become completely numb to the horror of jungle warfare. Firebase. Charlie was supposed to be a routine patrol, a sweep and clear operation in a sector that intelligence said was lightly defended. Intelligence was wrong. We walked into an ambush that had been planned for weeks, with North Vietnamese regulars dug into positions they'd been preparing since before we'd even received our orders. The first burst of automatic weapons fire cut down 3 of my men before any of us even saw the muzzle flashes. Tommy Rodriguez from El Paso, Danny O'Brien from Boston, and Mike Chen from San Francisco, boys who'd been joking about letters from their girlfriends just minutes before. They died instantly, which was probably a mercy considering what happened. Next, the rest of us hit the ground and started returning fire, but we were pinned down in a killing field with no cover except a few fallen logs and a drainage ditch that offered minimal protection. The enemy had positioned themselves perfectly, with overlapping fields of fire that made any movement extremely dangerous. That's when I saw Jimmy Patterson trying to crawl toward Danny's body. Jimmy was 19, a kid from rural Kentucky who'd never been more than 50 miles from his hometown before the army sent him to Southeast Asia. Danny had been carrying the radio, and without communication, we were all going to die in that jungle clearing. I could have stayed in the ditch. Military protocol in an ambush situation was to seek cover, assess the situation, and wait for reinforcements. But reinforcements were 30 minutes away, and Jimmy Patterson was going to die in the next 30 seconds if someone didn't act. I grabbed 2 fragmentation grenades and sprinted toward the enemy positions, using covering fire from my remaining squad members to get close enough to make a difference. The first grenade took out a machine gun nest that had been keeping us pinned down. The second grenade cleared a path for Jimmy to reach the radio and call in our position for artillery support. I took shrapnel in my left leg and right shoulder during that charge, wounds that still ache when the weather changes. But more importantly, I bought enough time for 9 men to make it out of that jungle alive. 9 men who went home to their families, who got married and had children, and lived the lives that Tommy, Danny, and Mike never got to experience. The Bronze Star citation reads, "For heroic achievement in connection with military operations against a hostile force." But what it really means is that on one terrible day in a place most Americans couldn't find on a map, I decided that my brothers' lives were worth more than my own safety. I served a 3rd tour because I felt like I owed something to the men who didn't make it home. Every day I survived was a day that belonged to them, and I wasn't going to waste it hiding in some rear echelon assignment. I stayed in the field until my enlistment was up, fighting alongside men who understood that survival depended on trust, loyalty, and the willingness to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. When I finally came home in 1973, America wasn't the same country I'd left. The war was unpopular. Veterans were often treated with suspicion or outright hostility, and finding work was difficult for someone whose primary skills involved combat leadership and weapons maintenance. But I'd learned something in Vietnam that most people never understand, that real strength comes from protecting others, even when it costs you everything. I carried those lessons into civilian life, into my marriage with Marie, and into raising Jessica. I thought I'd taught her about loyalty, about taking care of family, about the importance of honor and integrity. I thought she understood that the pension I earned came from 3 years of risking my life in service to my country and the values we claimed to believe in. But looking at my bronze star now, sitting alone in this tiny apartment while my daughter steals my pension money, I realize that some lessons can't be taught. Some people will take advantage of trust and loyalty because they see them as weaknesses instead of strengths. The same instincts that kept me alive in Vietnam are telling me now that something is very wrong with my financial situation. And just like that day at Firebase Charlie, I'm going to have to take action to protect what matters, even if it means fighting people I thought I could trust. The wedding photo on my nightstand shows 2 young people who believed love could conquer anything. Marie was 23, radiant in her mother's wedding dress, and I was 25, still lean from military service and optimistic about building a family with the most beautiful woman I'd ever met. I'd met Marie at a USO dance 6 months after returning from Vietnam. She was volunteering as a hostess, one of those angels who spent their Saturday nights making sure lonely soldiers felt welcome and appreciated. When she asked me to dance, I was so nervous I nearly tripped over my own feet trying to lead her. Onto the floor. "You're shaking," she'd said with a gentle smile that made my heart race even faster. "I'm better at marching than dancing," I'd admitted, and she'd laughed in a way that made me feel like maybe I could learn to be the kind of man who deserved someone like her. Marie had patience for my struggles adjusting to civilian life. The nightmares that woke me up sweating and shouting, the way loud noises made me hit the ground before I remembered I wasn't in combat anymore. The difficulty I had with crowds and the tendency to scan every room for potential threats. "It's okay," she'd whisper when I'd wake up from dreams about Firebase Charlie or the friends who hadn't made it home. "You're safe now. We're building something new together." And we did build something beautiful. Jessica was born in 1975. 2 years after our wedding, and watching Marie become a mother was like witnessing a miracle. She had this natural grace with babies, this intuitive understanding of what Jessica needed before our daughter even cried for it. I was terrified of being a father at first. What did I know about raising a child? My own father had been distant and demanding, more concerned with discipline than affection. The military had taught me about leadership and responsibility, but babies don't respond to chain of command structures. Marie taught me how to hold Jessica, how to change diapers, how to rock her to sleep when she was fussy. More importantly, she taught me that being a father meant being present, being patient, and showing love through actions rather than just words. "She needs to know you're her hero," Marie would say when I'd hesitate to pick Jessica up, because I was afraid my combat-scarred hands were too rough for something so delicate. But more than that, she needs to know you're her dad. Those early years were the happiest of my life. I found work at Henderson Hardware, a family-owned store where my military experience with logistics and inventory actually translated into useful civilian skills. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it was steady, and the owner appreciated having an employee who showed up on time, followed instructions, and treated customers with respect. Marie stayed home with Jessica until our daughter started school, then took a part-time job at the local hospital, working in the Volunteers Auxiliary and eventually moving into administrative work. She had a gift for making people feel comfortable during what were often the worst days of their lives. We bought our house on Maple Street when Jessica was 5, a 3-bedroom colonial with a big backyard and a front porch where we'd sit on summer evenings, watching Jessica play with the neighborhood kids. The mortgage payments stretched our budget, but Marie insisted that Jessica deserved to grow up in a stable home, with her own room and space to have friends over. "This is our investment in her future," Marie would say, as we painted Jessica's room pale yellow and hung curtains that Marie had sewn herself. "She'll always know she belongs somewhere." Jessica was an easy child to love, curious, affectionate, and remarkably empathetic for someone so young. She'd cry when other children got hurt, share her toys without being asked, and always wanted to help with household chores, even when her help made tasks take twice as long. When she was 8, Jessica announced that she wanted to be a nurse, like the women she'd met during visits to see Marie at the hospital. "I want to help people feel better," she'd said, with the kind of earnest determination that made Marie and me exchange looks of pride and amazement. The teenage years brought typical challenges: arguments about curfews, choices in friends, and the eternal struggle over how much independence a growing girl should have. But even during our most difficult moments, Jessica never lost the fundamental kindness that had characterized her childhood. She graduated high school with honors, got accepted to the state university with a partial scholarship, and seemed destined for the kind of successful, meaningful life that Marie and I had dreamed of when we held her as a baby. Marie and I were so proud the day Jessica graduated from college with her nursing degree. We sat in the auditorium, watching our daughter cross the stage, and I felt like every sacrifice we'd made had been worth it. The extra shifts at the hardware store to pay for textbooks, the vacations we'd skipped to cover tuition, the old car. We'd kept running for years longer than we should have. All of it had led to this moment when our daughter achieved her dreams. "We did good," Marie whispered, squeezing my hand as Jessica smiled and waved from the stage. "We did do good. At least, I thought we had. Looking at that wedding photo now, I wonder what Marie would think about what Jessica has become. Would she recognize the selfish, manipulative woman who steals from her elderly father while claiming to be helping him? Or would she see something I've missed? Some explanation that would make sense of the betrayal that's destroying everything? We built together. The stack of medical bills on my kitchen counter tells the story of Marie's final battle, one she fought with the same courage I'd seen from soldiers in combat, but against an enemy that couldn't be defeated with bravery alone. Cancer is a patient, relentless opponent that wages war on multiple fronts, attacking not just the body, but the family's financial stability and emotional reserves. Marie's diagnosis came on a Tuesday in October 2016. Stage 3 breast cancer, the doctor said, which meant aggressive treatment and no guarantees. She was 70 years old, still volunteering at the hospital 3 days a week, still the woman who made our house feel like home with her laugh and her endless capacity for caring about others. "We'll fight this," she'd said after the doctor left us alone in the examination room. "I'm not ready to leave you yet." And fight she did. Chemotherapy that left her weak and nauseous, but never broke her spirit. Radiation treatments that burned her skin, but couldn't touch her determination to survive. Surgery that removed parts of her body, but couldn't diminish the love that made her beautiful to me after 43 years of marriage. The medical bills started arriving within weeks of her diagnosis. Even with Medicare and the supplemental insurance I'd been paying for through my veterans benefits, the costs were staggering. Chemotherapy treatments cost $8,000 per session. Radiation therapy was $2,500 per week. The surgical procedures and hospital stays generated bills that would have been manageable for a wealthy family, but were overwhelming for a retired hardware store employee and his wife. Jessica started helping with the paperwork during Marie's second month of treatment. At first, her involvement seemed like a blessing. She understood medical terminology from her nursing background, and she had experience dealing with insurance companies and hospital billing departments. "Dad, let me handle this," she'd said when I was struggling to understand why Medicare had denied coverage for one of Marie's medications. "You need to focus on taking care of Mom, not fighting with bureaucrats." Jessica would arrive at our house twice a week, armed with manila folders and a laptop computer, spreading insurance forms and medical bills across our dining room table. She'd spend hours on the phone with various offices, arguing about coverage, decisions and payment schedules, fighting battles that I didn't have the energy or expertise to handle myself. "Your daughter is wonderful," Marie would say after Jessica left. "I don't know what we'd do without her help." At the time, I felt nothing but gratitude for Jessica's assistance. Taking care of Marie required all of my attention and emotional energy. Helping her to the bathroom when she was too weak to walk alone, holding her head when the chemotherapy made her violently sick, sleeping in the chair beside her hospital bed during the long nights when she was too frightened to be alone. The financial stress was constant and overwhelming. Our savings account, built carefully over 40 years of marriage, was disappearing at a rate that terrified me. The supplemental insurance covered some costs, but there were always gaps, experimental treatments that weren't covered, medications that required pre-authorization, specialist consultations that fell outside our plan's network. Jessica suggested I apply for additional financial assistance through veterans programs and Medicare hardship provisions. She helped me fill out applications that seemed designed to discourage people from seeking help, with their complex requirements and invasive personal questions about assets and income. "Dad, you earned these benefits," she'd said when I hesitated to apply for aid that felt too much like charity. "You served your country, and now your country should serve you." The assistance programs helped, but they weren't enough to cover the avalanche of bills that arrived daily in our mailbox. Marie needed treatments that cost more than my monthly pension, and the insurance companies seemed to find new reasons to deny or delay payments for essential care. During Marie's final months, when the cancer had spread beyond the reach of medical intervention, Jessica's involvement with our finances became even more intensive. She convinced me to sign power of attorney documents that would allow her to handle our affairs if I became too overwhelmed to manage them myself. "Dad, what if something happens to you while you're taking care of Mom?" she'd asked. "Someone needs to be able to pay bills and handle medical decisions. This is just a precaution to protect both of you." The documents seemed reasonable at the time. I was exhausted from months of caregiving, overwhelmed by medical decisions I didn't understand, and grateful to have a daughter who was willing to help shoulder the burden of managing our increasingly complicated financial situation. Marie died on March 3rd, 2018, in our bedroom at home, surrounded by the people who loved her. Jessica was holding one of her hands, and I was holding the other, when she took her final breath and slipped away from the pain that had dominated the last 18 months of her life. The funeral expenses were the final assault on our family finances. Even with veterans' burial benefits and the modest life insurance policy we'd maintained, the costs of giving Marie the dignified farewell she deserved consumed the last of our savings and left me entirely dependent on my monthly pension and Social Security payments. That's when Jessica's help with my finances evolved from temporary assistance during a family crisis into permanent management of every aspect of my financial life. And looking back now at those medical bills that broke our financial stability, I realize they also broke something more important. They created the vulnerability that allowed my daughter to begin stealing from the father who trusted her completely. A power of attorney document that Jessica convinced me to sign sits in a manila folder in my bedroom drawer, and every time I look at it, I feel a mixture of betrayal and self-recrimination that's almost too painful to bear. The legal language is dense and confusing, filled with terms like durable power and financial management authority. But what it really says is that I voluntarily gave my daughter permission to steal from me. Jessica presented the document. to me 6 weeks after Marie's funeral, during one of our weekly meetings to review my finances and plan for my future as a widower. I was still deep in grief, struggling with the practical challenges of living alone after 45 years of marriage, and overwhelmed by the mountain of paperwork that seemed to multiply daily. "Dad, we need to talk about protecting your assets," she'd said, settling into the chair across from me at the dining room table where Marie and I had shared thousands of meals. "You're vulnerable right now, and there are people who target elderly individuals who've recently lost their spouses." The way she explained it, the power of attorney was a protective measure designed to prevent me from being taken advantage of by scam artists and predatory businesses that targeted grieving widowers. She showed me articles about elderly people who'd lost their life savings to telephone fraudsters, door-to-door salesmen, and online romance scams. "I'm not saying you're not capable of managing your money," she'd said, her voice full of concern. That seemed genuine at the time. "But you're dealing with so much right now, and I worry about you making financial decisions when you're not thinking clearly." She was right about my emotional state. I was making mistakes, paying bills twice, forgetting to deposit checks, losing track of important documents in the chaos of grief and adjustment. The house felt too big and too empty without Marie's presence, and simple tasks like grocery shopping or managing the checkbook seemed overwhelming. "This is just temporary," Jessica had assured me, as she guided my hand to the signature line. "Until you get back on your feet and feel ready to handle everything yourself again. I'll take care of the day-to-day financial management, and you can focus on healing and figuring out what you want to do with the rest of your life." The document was notarized by Jessica's friend from the hospital, a woman who'd known our family for years and who expressed sympathy for my loss while witnessing my signature. Everything seemed legitimate and caring, motivated by a daughter's love for her father and concern for his well-being during a difficult transition. At first, Jessica's management of my finances seemed helpful and appropriate. She consolidated my various accounts to make them easier to monitor. She set up automatic payments for utilities and recurring expenses, so I wouldn't have to worry about missing due dates. She organized my paperwork into labeled folders and created a simple budget that showed my monthly income and expected expenses. "See, Dad, you're actually in pretty good financial shape," she'd said, showing me a spreadsheet that listed my pension, Social Security, and the small amount of savings that remained after Marie's medical expenses. "You'll be able to live comfortably if we're careful about spending." But gradually, Jessica's involvement became more controlling and less transparent. She opened a new checking account that she claimed would be easier for her to monitor and manage. She suggested I stop receiving paper statements to reduce clutter, and switched everything to electronic delivery that came to her email address instead of mine. "It's more secure this way," she'd explained when I asked why I couldn't see my own bank statements. "Identity theft is a huge problem for seniors, and paper mail is one of the ways criminals get access to your personal information." The weekly allowance system started 3 months after I'd signed the power of attorney. Jessica announced that giving me a set amount of cash each week would help me budget more effectively and prevent the kind of impulsive spending that could deplete my savings. $200 a week should cover all your personal expenses, she'd said, handing me an envelope of cash like I was a child receiving lunch money. Groceries, medications, household supplies, and a little extra for entertainment. If you need more for something specific, just let me know, and we can discuss it. $200 a week. For a man who'd worked full-time for 45 years, who'd served his country in combat, who'd raised a family and owned a home and paid taxes and contributed to his community. $200 a week, handed to me by my own daughter like I was a dependent who couldn't be trusted with my own money. But I'd accepted it because I trusted Jessica and because I was still struggling with grief and the practical challenges of living alone. I told myself that she was trying to help, that the financial management was temporary, and that I could always ask for the power of attorney to be revoked if I decided I wanted to handle my own affairs again. What I didn't understand then was that Jessica had no intention of returning financial control to me. The power of attorney wasn't a temporary assistance measure. It was a permanent transfer of authority that allowed her to treat my pension and Social Security payments like her personal income while giving me just enough money to survive. The document I'd signed in good faith, trusting my daughter to act in my best interests, had become the legal foundation for systematic theft that would continue for years. And every time I look at my signature on that paper, I'm reminded that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we trust completely, and that love and family relationships can be weaponized by those who see kindness as weakness and trust as opportunity. The weekly envelope arrives every Tuesday at exactly 3 p.m., delivered by Jessica with the punctuality of a government bureaucrat and the demeanor of someone dispensing charity to the deserving poor. The small manila envelope contains exactly $200 in $20 bills, counted out in front of me like I might try to claim I received less than my allotment. "Here's your allowance for the week, Dad," Jessica says each Tuesday, placing the envelope on my kitchen table with the same tone she might use to address a child who'd completed his chores. "Try to make it last until next week, okay? Try to make it last," as if I'm some spendthrift who might blow the money on frivolous purchases instead of the careful budgeting required to survive on $200 for 7 days. As if I haven't been managing money responsibly for longer than she's been alive. The ritual of receiving my weekly allowance has become the most humiliating part of my existence. Jessica sits across from me at the table while I count the bills, checking to make sure the amount is correct, and then she launches into her weekly lecture about financial responsibility and the importance of living within my means. "I know it's not a lot of money," she'll say, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "but this is what we can afford, given your fixed income situation. You're lucky to have family who cares enough to help manage your finances and make sure you don't end up homeless or unable to pay for necessities. Lucky. I'm lucky to receive $200 per week from my own pension money, while my daughter and her husband use the remaining $3,647 to fund their lifestyle upgrades and luxury purchases. Lucky to be treated like a welfare recipient in my own home. Dependent on the generosity of people who are stealing from me while claiming to protect me. The envelope itself is a symbol of how completely Jessica has infantilized my existence. She could transfer money electronically, write me a check, or simply give me access to my own bank account. But the cash envelope system serves a psychological purpose. It reinforces my dependence on her decisions and reminds me every week that I'm not trusted to manage money responsibly. "What do you need to buy this week?" she'll ask, as if my shopping list requires her approval. When I mention needing groceries, she'll offer suggestions about shopping at discount stores and buying generic brands. When I mention needing new clothes or household items, she'll question whether the purchases are really necessary or if I can make do with what I have. The worst part is how she frames the allowance as generous assistance that I should be grateful to receive. "A lot of families would just put their elderly parents in nursing homes and let the government handle their care," she'll say when I express any frustration with the arrangement. "We're keeping you independent and in your own apartment, which costs us time and money that we could be using for our own family." Time and money, as if managing my stolen pension payments is some kind of burden that she's shouldering out of familial obligation rather than a criminal enterprise that's making her wealthy at my expense. The $200 weekly allowance represents a masterful example of financial manipulation disguised as caring assistance. It's enough money to keep me alive, but not enough to allow any independence or dignity. I can afford basic groceries if I shop carefully and buy generic brands. I can pay for essential medications if I use discount programs and skip doses when money is tight. I can cover utilities for my small apartment if I keep the heat low and limit my electricity usage. But there's no money for dignity. No money for the small luxuries that make life worth living: a good meal at a restaurant, a movie ticket, a gift for someone's birthday, or the ability to be generous when others are in need. No money for emergencies or unexpected expenses that would allow me to handle problems myself instead of having to ask Jessica for permission to spend my own money. The allowance system also serves as a constant reminder of my powerlessness in the relationship. Every purchase requires careful consideration of whether I can afford it within the week's budget. Every trip to the grocery store involves calculating costs and making compromises between items I need and items I want. Every financial decision reinforces the message that I'm not capable of managing my own affairs. Jessica has even started questioning my spending choices when the money runs out before the weekends. "You went through your allowance pretty quickly this week," she'll say with concern. "That sounds genuine but feels judgmental. Are you sure you're being careful about prices? Maybe I should start doing your grocery shopping for you." The suggestion that she might take over my grocery shopping represents the next level of control she's considering, removing even the small independence I have left by making all purchasing decisions for me. The weekly allowance would become merely spending money for incidentals, while she controls every aspect of what I eat, wear, and use in my daily life. But what Jessica doesn't understand is that the weekly envelope has also become evidence of her systematic theft. Every Tuesday, when she hands me $200 while keeping $3,647 for herself, she's creating a documented pattern of financial abuse that I'm carefully tracking and recording. The woman who thinks she's controlling an incompetent old man is actually providing evidence to the competent old soldier who's building a case against her. The envelope that symbolizes my humiliation will eventually become proof of her crimes. And when that day comes, Jessica will learn that underestimating your opponent is always a tactical mistake, especially when your opponent is someone who survived 3 tours in Vietnam and knows something about long-term strategic planning. The small notebook where I track every penny of my weekly allowance has become my lifeline to dignity in a situation designed to strip away my independence and self-respect. The spiral-bound book, measuring just 4 by 6 inches, sits on my kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, and every entry represents my refusal to accept the financial helplessness that Jessica assumes defines my existence. Monday, groceries at Save-A-Lot, $47.83. Tuesday, prescription copay, $15. Wednesday, laundry detergent, $3.99. Thursday, bus fare to library, $2.50. Each expense is recorded in my careful handwriting with running totals that show exactly how much of my $200 weekly allowance remains available for the rest of the week. The notebook represents more than just financial tracking. It's proof that my mind is sharp, my organizational skills remain intact, and my ability to manage money responsibly hasn't deteriorated despite Jessica's claims that I need her oversight to prevent financial mistakes. Every balanced weekly budget is evidence that I'm perfectly capable of handling my own affairs. But the notebook also tells a heartbreaking story of the compromises and sacrifices required to survive on $200 per week when you're accustomed to financial independence. The entries reveal a man who shops exclusively at discount stores, buys generic brands whenever possible, and carefully calculates the cost of every purchase before putting items in his shopping cart. Grocery shopping has become an exercise in strategic planning that would impress a military logistics officer. I clip coupons from the newspaper, compare prices between stores, and base my meal planning on what's available at the lowest cost rather than what I actually want to eat. Ground beef at $2.99 per pound instead of the chuck roast I prefer. Canned vegetables instead of fresh produce. Generic breakfast cereal instead of the name brands I grew up eating. The notebook shows how I've learned to stretch meals across multiple days to stay within budget. A whole chicken, purchased on sale for $4.67, provides dinner one night, soup for lunch the next day, and sandwiches for 2 more meals. Rice and beans appear frequently in my meal planning because they're cheap, filling, and can be combined with small amounts of meat or vegetables to create satisfying dinners. Personal care items require the same careful budgeting as food. Generic shampoo instead of name brands, store-brand toothpaste and deodorant, disposable razors that I use longer than recommended because replacing them every week would strain my budget. Even toilet paper becomes a calculated expense with comparisons between price per roll and number of sheets to determine the best value. The notebook also reveals the emotional cost of living on such a restricted budget. Entries like couldn't afford birthday card for Mrs. Henderson next door, or skipped coffee with veterans group, too expensive show how financial limitations affect my ability to maintain relationships and participate in activities that would provide social connection and purpose. Medical expenses create particular challenges that the notebook documents with painful clarity. Copays for doctor visits and prescription medications consume significant portions of my weekly allowance, sometimes forcing me to choose between medical care and other necessities. The entry, delayed prescription refill until next week. Short. $12 represents a decision that could have serious health consequences, but was necessary to afford groceries. Transportation costs are another constant concern, reflected in the notebook's pages. I walk whenever possible to save bus fare, which means shopping at the closest stores, rather than traveling to locations with better prices. When weather makes walking impossible, I have to budget for transportation that many people take for granted. The most heartbreaking entries are the ones that reveal opportunities for small generosities that I have to pass up because of financial constraints. Wanted to buy Girl Scout cookies from neighbor's granddaughter, couldn't afford $5, or collection for church roof repair, couldn't contribute, show how poverty limits my ability to participate in my community in ways that once gave my life meaning. But the notebook also serves as evidence of my competence and careful management of limited resources. Every week balances perfectly, with income and expenses tracked to the penny. There are no mathematical errors, no forgotten purchases, no impulsive spending that would justify Jessica's claims that I need financial supervision. More importantly, the notebook is building a record of the systematic financial abuse I'm experiencing. The weekly $200 allowance, documented consistently for years, will serve as evidence of how Jessica has restricted my access to my own money while claiming to act in my best interests. I've also started including notes about Jessica's lifestyle and spending patterns that I observed during her weekly visits. Jessica wearing new jewelry, diamond earrings, or mentioned vacation to Hawaii next month provide context for what she's doing with the money she's stealing from my pension. The notebook has become my secret weapon in the war. Jessica doesn't know she's fighting. While she sees an elderly man carefully counting his weekly allowance money, I'm actually gathering evidence and maintaining records that will expose her crimes. The same attention to detail that helped me survive in Vietnam is now helping me document the theft that's destroying my financial security. Every entry in that small notebook is a reminder that I'm not the helpless victim Jessica thinks she's controlling. I'm a soldier, gathering intelligence, preparing for a battle that will restore my dignity and hold her accountable for the betrayal of everything I thought family relationships were supposed to represent. The unopened bank statement that changed. Everything was tucked behind some junk mail that Jessica had missed during her weekly visit. A single piece of white paper that would shatter the illusion she'd carefully constructed about my financial situation. The envelope was addressed to me at my apartment, bearing the return address of the Veterans Administration Benefits Office and it contained information that Jessica had been intercepting and hiding for years. I'd been suspicious for months about the disconnect between my actual financial needs and the $200 weekly allowance Jessica claimed was all I could afford. The math never seemed right, even with modest Social Security payments, and what Jessica told me was a small military pension. My total income should have been more than $800 per month. But whenever I asked for details about my finances, Jessica would deflect with complex explanations about taxes, Medicare deductions, and other expenses that supposedly consumed most of my income. "You don't need to worry about the details, Dad," she'd say whenever I pressed for specific information about my pension amount or bank balances. "I'm handling everything to make sure you're protected and that your money lasts as long as possible. But this bank statement, delivered directly from the VA because of some administrative glitch that bypassed Jessica's interception system, contained numbers." Jessica's Facebook photos told a story of luxury and prosperity that could only be funded by stolen money, and scrolling through her social media posts felt like watching someone celebrate their crimes in public while their victim struggled to afford groceries. The images on my library computer screen showed a lifestyle that was completely inconsistent with the income of a hospital nurse and her husband, who worked in middle management at an insurance company. The photos from their Hawaiian vacation last year showed Jessica and her husband Mark lounging on beaches at what appeared to be a luxury resort, with captions about finally getting to relax in paradise and grateful for this amazing anniversary trip. The resort they'd chosen wasn't the kind of place that middle-class families typically visit for vacation. The oceanfront suites and private beach access represented the kind of expense that would require months of saving on their legitimate salaries, but I knew exactly how they'd afforded that Hawaiian vacation. My stolen pension money had paid for their flights, hotel accommodations, meals at expensive restaurants, and the various activities and excursions they'd documented with dozens of photos. While I was counting pennies to afford soup and generic bread, Jessica was using my money to fund Instagram-worthy vacation experiences. The timeline of their lifestyle improvements corresponded perfectly with the period when Jessica had assumed control of my finances. The photos from 2018, shortly after Marie's death, and Jessica's takeover of my financial management showed modest family activities and simple celebrations. But starting in 2019, their social media presence began featuring increasingly expensive purchases and experiences. A new BMW appeared in their driveway in early 2019, a luxury vehicle that would have required car payments exceeding $800 per month. Jessica's posts about the car included comments about finally being able to afford the reliable transportation we deserve, and grateful for financial stability that lets us make smart investments. Smart investments. She was calling the theft of my pension money a smart investment in their family's financial future, while I rode the bus because I couldn't afford cab fare to medical appointments. Their kitchen renovation, documented extensively on Facebook throughout. The summer of 2019 featured granite countertops, custom cabinetry, and high-end appliances that represented a complete gut renovation, costing at least $40,000. Jessica had posted before and after photos with captions about finally creating the dream kitchen we've always wanted, and so blessed to be able to make this investment in our home. The kitchen renovation alone had consumed more than a year's worth of my stolen pension payments, money that should have been available for my own housing improvements or medical expenses. While Jessica was selecting designer fixtures and imported stone countertops, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment with appliances that barely functioned and a kitchen so small I could barely prepare simple meals. Mark's posts from 2020 showed him purchasing a boat, a 24-foot recreational fishing vessel that he'd named Second Wind. The photos of him and Jessica enjoying weekend fishing trips and water sports represented another major expense funded by my stolen income. Boat payments, insurance, marina fees and maintenance costs would have required several $1,000s annually. Money taken directly from the pension I'd earned through military service, while Mark enjoyed recreational activities I couldn't afford. Jessica's jewelry collection, visible in various Facebook photos over the past few years, had grown to include pieces that I recognized as expensive name-brand items. Diamond earrings, gold bracelets and designer watches appeared regularly in her posts, often accompanied by comments from friends admiring her beautiful new jewelry and asking where she'd purchased such lovely pieces. The jewelry purchases were particularly painful to see because Marie had owned very few pieces of expensive jewelry, and most of what she'd owned had sentimental rather than monetary value. Jessica was using stolen money to buy luxury accessories while living in the same community where her father scraped by on $200 per week. Their children's activities and expenses also reflected the financial benefits of their theft from my pension. Private music lessons, expensive sports equipment, summer camps that cost thousands of dollars, and educational opportunities that would have been beyond their reach on their legitimate salaries. Jessica's posts about her children's achievements were filled with pride about providing opportunities that we never could have afforded when we were their age. They could afford those opportunities because they were stealing from an elderly veteran who was eating soup and crackers for dinner while they funded their children's private lessons and expensive activities. The most infuriating posts were the ones where Jessica portrayed herself as a generous daughter who was sacrificing to care for her aging father. Photos of her visiting my apartment were captioned with messages about checking on Dad and making sure he has everything he needs. Comments from her friends praised her dedication to family and her willingness to help her elderly parent during his time of need. The same woman who was stealing $3,000 per month from my pension was presenting herself on social media as a devoted daughter whose weekly visits represented generous assistance to a father who would otherwise struggle to manage his affairs. Her friends' comments about what a wonderful daughter she was and how lucky I was to have such caring family made me want to throw the computer across the library. But Jessica's Facebook photos were also providing evidence of her crimes. The timeline of expensive purchases, vacations, and lifestyle improvements corresponded exactly with the period when she'd been stealing my pension money. The costs of their luxury lifestyle far exceeded what they could afford on their legitimate salaries, and the documentation they'd provided on social media would serve as proof of their financial crimes. Every vacation photo, every expensive purchase, every luxury experience Jessica had documented on Facebook represented stolen money from a veteran who'd earned his pension through combat service and honorable sacrifice. And now those same photos would help build the case that would expose her theft and restore the dignity she'd stolen along with my money. The bank account statements I finally obtained through the Veterans Administration revealed the full scope of Jessica's systematic theft, and the numbers were even worse than I'd feared when I first discovered my actual pension amount. The documents showed 5 years of deposits totaling $230,820 in stolen pension money, with additional Social Security theft bringing the total to over $340,000 that had been diverted from my accounts into Jessica's control. The VA benefits counselor who helped me access the records was a woman named Patricia Williams, herself a veteran who understood the unique challenges faced by elderly military retirees. When I explained my situation, she immediately recognized the pattern of elder financial abuse and helped me navigate the bureaucratic process of recovering my financial records. Mr. Thompson, what you're describing is unfortunately more common than you might think, Patricia said as she reviewed my case file. Family members often take advantage of veterans' benefits, especially when the veteran is elderly or has recently experienced a major life change, like losing a spouse. The bank statements showed that Jessica had been using the power of attorney I'd signed to redirect my entire pension to an account she controlled at First National Bank. The account was technically in my name, but Jessica was the only person with access to the funds. She'd been treating my pension like her personal income while providing me with just enough money to survive. But the statements revealed something even more disturbing than simple theft. Jessica had been systematically increasing her withdrawals from my accounts over the years, starting with relatively modest amounts in 2018 and escalating to the point where she was now taking more than $3,000 per month beyond my pension payments. She'd been stealing from my Social Security benefits as well, leaving me with less than $200 per week from an income that should have provided comfortable retirement. The banking records showed a pattern of withdrawals that corresponded directly with Jessica's major purchases and lifestyle improvements. Large cash withdrawals preceded their Hawaiian vacation, their kitchen renovation, and Mark's boat purchase. The timing was so obvious that it created a clear paper trail connecting my stolen money to their luxury spending. Patricia helped me understand the legal implications of what Jessica had done. "This isn't just family financial disagreement," she explained. "This is elder financial abuse, which is a serious crime in our state. The amount of money involved and the systematic nature of the theft could result in felony charges." The bank statements also showed that Jessica had been forging my signature on various documents related to the account management. My supposed authorizations for large withdrawals were signed with handwriting that didn't match my actual signature, evidence that she'd been committing fraud in addition to theft. Most disturbing was the discovery that Jessica had been claiming financial hardship to various veterans assistance programs while simultaneously stealing my pension money. She'd applied for heating assistance, food stamps, and other aid programs on my behalf, claiming that my income was insufficient to cover basic living expenses. The applications for government assistance, signed with my forged signature, painted a picture of an elderly veteran living in poverty and struggling to afford necessities. Meanwhile, Jessica was using my actual income to fund luxury purchases and vacation expenses that exceeded what most middle-class families could afford. "She's been double-dipping," Patricia explained, "stealing your pension money for her own use while also collecting government benefits that you're not actually eligible for given your real income level. That's fraud against both you and the taxpayers who fund assistance programs." The bank statements revealed that Jessica had stolen approximately $68,000 per year from my combined pension and Social Security benefits. That amount exceeded the median household income in our area, meaning she'd been essentially stealing a full-time salary from my retirement benefits while claiming to provide generous assistance to her financially struggling father. The documentation I'd gathered was overwhelming in its scope and clarity. The VA pension statement showing my actual income, the bank records revealing Jessica's systematic theft, the Social Security statements confirming additional stolen benefits, and the fraudulent applications for government assistance created a comprehensive picture of criminal activity that had been ongoing for years. Patricia connected me with an attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases, a man named David Chen, who had extensive experience prosecuting family members who financially exploited elderly relatives. "Mr. Thompson, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of elder financial abuse I've ever seen," he said after reviewing my documentation. "The paper trail is incredibly detailed, and the amount of money involved means this will be prosecuted as a serious felony. Your daughter and her husband are looking at significant prison time and full restitution of the stolen funds." The attorney also explained that Jessica's theft had broader implications beyond just the money she'd stolen. Because she used fraudulent documents to access your benefits and applied for government assistance under false pretenses, She's also facing charges for fraud, forgery, and theft of government services. The federal government takes veterans' benefits fraud very seriously. As I sat in the attorney's office, surrounded by evidence of my daughter's betrayal, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination that reminded me of emotions I'd experienced in combat. The sadness came from realizing that someone I'd loved and trusted had been systematically destroying my financial security for years. The determination came from knowing that I finally had the weapons needed to fight back against the person who'd been stealing from me while claiming to help me. The bank account statements represented more than just financial records. They were proof that Jessica had committed serious crimes against someone who'd earned his pension through honorable military service. And now those same records would be used to ensure that her crimes faced the full consequences of both criminal prosecution and civil liability for the harm she'd caused to someone who'd trusted her completely. The black and white photographs from Vietnam that I keep in a shoebox under my bed tell the story of brotherhood, sacrifice, and the kind of courage that Jessica clearly never understood when she decided to steal from someone who'd earned his pension in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Looking at those photos now, faces of young men who'd trusted each other with their lives, I draw strength from memories of battles fought and won against enemies who at least had the honesty to be openly hostile. The photograph that means the most to me shows my squad at Firebase Delta in 1970, 2 weeks before the ambush that earned me my Bronze Star. 12 young men, most of them barely old enough to vote, grinning at the camera despite being thousands of miles from home in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Half of those men didn't make it home alive, but while they lived, they embodied values that Jessica has never understood. Loyalty, honor, and the willingness to sacrifice for something bigger than personal comfort. Tommy Rodriguez is in the front row, the kid from El Paso who used to write letters to 3 different girlfriends and somehow keep all their names straight. He died saving 2 wounded soldiers during a mortar attack, using his own body as a shield while calling for medical evacuation. Tommy never lived to see his 21st birthday, but he died knowing that his sacrifice meant something. Danny O'Brien stands behind Tommy, the Irish kid from Boston, who could make anyone laugh even in the worst circumstances. Danny was killed by a sniper while trying to rescue a wounded civilian who'd been caught in crossfire during a village sweep. He had a choice between staying in cover and risking his life for someone he'd never met, and Danny chose courage over safety. Mike Chen is on the right side of the photo, the Chinese-American soldier who'd faced discrimination his whole life, but still volunteered to serve his country in combat. Mike died defending a landing zone, while helicopters evacuated wounded soldiers, fighting until his ammunition ran out and then using his rifle as a club until enemy fire finally brought him down. These men understood something that Jessica never learned, that honor and integrity aren't negotiable, even when maintaining them requires personal sacrifice. They died protecting their brothers and serving their country with the kind of loyalty that can't be bought, sold, or stolen. Looking at their faces now, I realize that Jessica's theft isn't just a crime against me. It's a betrayal of everyone who served and died to earn the benefits she's been stealing. My pension was paid for with the blood of men like Tommy, Danny, and Mike, and every dollar she's taken represents a dishonor to their memory and sacrifice. The flashbacks that sometimes wake me up at night aren't just about the terror of combat. They're about the clarity of purpose that came from fighting alongside men who would die for each other without hesitation. In Vietnam, we faced enemies who wanted to kill us, but at least we knew where we stood. There was honesty in combat, even when it was brutal and terrifying. Jessica's theft represents a different kind of warfare, one where the enemy pretends to be an ally while systematically destroying your defenses and stealing your resources. She's been conducting a covert operation against her own father, using lies and manipulation instead of bullets and bombs, but causing damage that's just as real and devastating. The military training that kept me alive in Vietnam is now helping me wage a different kind of campaign against someone who assumed that my age and grief had made me an easy target. The same tactical thinking that helped me survive 3 tours of combat is being applied to gathering evidence, planning strategy, and executing a counterattack that will expose Jessica's crimes. In Vietnam, we learned that successful operations require careful intelligence gathering, strategic planning, and the patience to wait for the right moment to strike. You don't reveal your position to the enemy until you're ready to win the battle, and you don't waste ammunition on uncertain targets when you can wait for a clear shot that will eliminate the threat. Jessica has been fighting a one-sided war against someone she assumed was defeated and defenseless. She's been so confident in her control over my finances and my dependence on her help that she's become careless about covering her tracks. The social media posts, the bank records, the forged documents. She's been creating evidence of her crimes because she never imagined that her victim might fight back. But she's forgotten that her victim is someone who survived Fire-Based Charlie, who earned a Bronze Star for courage under fire, and who learned from men like Tommy Rodriguez that real strength comes from protecting others even when it costs you everything. The photographs from Vietnam remind me that I've faced worse enemies than a daughter who steals from her elderly father. I've survived situations where death was probable and defeat seemed certain, and I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to do what's right despite being afraid of the consequences. Jessica's theft has awakened something in me that I thought might have died with age and civilian life. The warrior instinct that kept me alive in combat is now focused on a different kind of enemy, one who's been hiding behind family relationships while conducting a systematic campaign to destroy my financial security and independence. The men in those Vietnam photographs died fighting for principles that Jessica has betrayed through her crimes against someone who served alongside them. But their sacrifice taught me that some battles are worth fighting regardless of the personal cost, and that honor demands action even when victory seems uncertain. Looking at their young faces, I know that Tommy, Danny, and Mike would understand why I'm preparing to fight this battle against my own daughter. They'd recognize that sometimes the people you love most are the ones who hurt you deepest, and that protecting yourself from betrayal requires the same kind of courage that combat demanded. The photographs from Vietnam are more than just memories. They're reminders that I've never lost a battle when I fought for something that mattered. And now I'm fighting for the pension that was earned with the blood of better men than I am. Money set aside to honor the service and sacrifice of everyone who didn't make it home from that war. Jessica picked the wrong veteran to steal from, and she's about to learn that some old soldiers never stop fighting, especially when they're fighting for the honor of brothers who died, trusting that their sacrifice would be remembered and respected. The manila folder labeled Evidence Jessica Thompson Financial Crimes sits on my kitchen table like a military intelligence file, organized with the same systematic precision I'd learned during 3 tours in Vietnam when gathering information could mean the difference between life and death. Every document inside represents a piece of the puzzle that will expose Jessica's theft and restore the financial independence she's stolen from someone who earned it through honorable service. The folder contains bank statements showing 5 years of systematic theft totaling more than $340,000 in stolen pension and Social Security benefits. VA pension records proving my actual monthly income of $3,147 versus the $200 weekly allowance Jessica provides. Social Security documentation showing additional benefits she's been stealing while claiming I'm financially dependent on her assistance. I've organized the evidence chronologically, starting with the power of attorney document I'd signed in good faith and progressing through bank records that show escalating theft over time. Each section is labeled and indexed, making it easy for law enforcement and attorneys to understand the scope and systematic nature of Jessica's crimes. The Facebook screenshots occupy their own section, printed in color, to show the timeline of luxury purchases and lifestyle improvements that correspond directly with the theft from my accounts. Jessica's own social media posts provide evidence of expenses that far exceed what she and Mark could afford on their legitimate salaries. Patricia Williams from the VA had connected me with Detective Sarah Martinez from the county sheriff's office, a specialist in elder abuse cases who understood the unique challenges faced by veterans who become victims of family financial crimes. "Mr. Thompson, this is one of the most comprehensive cases I've seen," she said, after reviewing my evidence folder. "Your military background really shows in how you've documented everything." The evidence folder also contains research I'd conducted on state and federal laws regarding elder financial abuse, particularly crimes against veterans. The penalties are severe, felony charges carrying potential prison sentences of up to 20 years, plus mandatory restitution and civil liability that could exceed the amount of money stolen. Legal aid attorneys had provided additional documentation showing that Jessica's crimes weren't limited to simple theft. The forged signatures on bank documents constituted fraud. The applications for government assistance programs she'd filed, using false information, represented additional felonies. The systematic nature of her theft over multiple years supported charges under organized crime statutes. I'd also gathered character references from other veterans and community members who could testify about my mental competence and financial management skills. The portrait they painted was of someone fully capable of managing his own affairs, contradicting Jessica's claims that I needed financial supervision due to age-related limitations. The investigation folder represented months of careful work, gathering evidence and building a case that would withstand aggressive defense strategies Jessica's attorneys might employ. Every document was authenticated, every financial record was verified, and every piece of evidence was organized to support both criminal prosecution and civil recovery of stolen funds. Most importantly, the folder contained contact information for organizations that assist veterans who've been victims of family financial abuse. I wasn't fighting this battle alone. There were resources and advocates available to ensure that Jessica's crimes faced appropriate consequences and that other veterans would be protected from similar exploitation. As I reviewed the completed evidence file, I felt the same sense of preparation and confidence that had served me well in combat situations. The intelligence had been gathered, the battle plan was developed, and the time for action was approaching. Jessica had been conducting a covert operation against her father for years, but now she was about to discover that her target had been conducting counterintelligence operations of his own. The family photo I placed on my kitchen table before Jessica's arrival showed 3 people who had once loved and trusted each other completely: Marie, Jessica, and me at Jessica's college graduation, proud parents celebrating their daughter's achievement and looking forward to the bright future she seemed destined to enjoy. That photo would serve as a reminder of what Jessica had destroyed. When she chose theft over family loyalty, Jessica arrived for her weekly visit at exactly 3:80 p.m., carrying the envelope containing my $200 allowance, and wearing the confident demeanor of someone who believed she was in complete control of the situation. She had no idea that I'd discovered her theft or that I'd spent months gathering evidence that would expose her crimes and restore my financial independence. "How are you feeling this week, Dad?" she asked, with the same patronizing tone she'd used for years, setting the envelope on the table next to the family photo without seeming to notice its significance. "I hope you've been managing your money carefully and not running short before the week ends." "I've been managing just fine," I replied, maintaining the calm, controlled voice I'd learned to use in combat when facing dangerous situations. "In fact, I've been doing some research about money management, and I've learned some very interesting things about my financial situation." Jessica's expression shifted slightly, the first hint that she sensed something had changed in our usual dynamic. "What kind of research, Dad?" "I hope you haven't been listening to scammers who target elderly people with promises about increasing their income." "Actually, I've been researching my actual income," I said, pulling out the VA pension statement that had started this investigation. "It turns out that my military pension is significantly larger than you've been telling me. In fact, it's $3,147 per month, not the modest amount you've claimed I receive." The color drained from Jessica's face as she recognized the document I was holding. "Dad, where did you get that? You know I handle all your financial paperwork to protect you from confusion and mistakes." "I got it from the Veterans Administration," I replied, opening my evidence folder and placing additional documents on the table. "Along with Social Security records, bank statements, and quite a bit of other information about where my money has been going for the past 5 years. Jessica's attempts at maintaining control of the situation became increasingly desperate as I methodically presented evidence of her theft. Bank records showing $340,000 in stolen benefits. Facebook screenshots documenting luxury purchases funded by my pension money. Forged signatures on documents she'd claimed I'd authorized. "Dad, you don't understand how complicated financial management is," she said, falling back on the gaslighting techniques she'd used for years. "I've been protecting you from making mistakes that could cost you everything. You should be grateful that I've been willing to sacrifice my time and energy to help you." "Grateful?" I replied, my voice still calm, but carrying the authority I'd learned to project as a combat leader. "You want me to be grateful that you've stolen $340,000 from money I earned serving my country? Grateful that you've been living in luxury while I've been eating soup and crackers for dinner?" I placed the family photo directly in front of her, pointing to the image of the proud parents who had trusted their daughter to carry on their values of honor and integrity. "Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become. We raised you to understand the difference between right and wrong, but you've chosen to steal from your own father while pretending to help him." Jessica's husband, Mark, who had been sitting silently during the confrontation, finally spoke up. "Mr. Thompson, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Jessica has been working very hard to manage your finances and make sure you're taken care of." "The only misunderstanding," I replied, "is that you both assumed you were stealing from someone who was too old and confused to fight back. But you made a crucial mistake. You stole from a soldier who learned something about gathering, intelligence, and planning counterattacks." As I continued presenting evidence of their crimes, Jessica realized that her years of systematic theft had been discovered and documented by someone she'd underestimated completely. The confident manipulator who'd been controlling my finances was now facing the reality that her crimes would have serious legal consequences. "Dad, we can work this out," she said, her voice now pleading rather than patronizing. "Let's talk about this calmly and figure out a solution that works for everyone." "We are working it out," I replied, pointing to the evidence folder. "Through the legal system, where theft and elder abuse are treated as the serious crimes they are." The police report I filed with Detective Martinez marked the beginning of the end for Jessica's criminal enterprise, transforming her from a confident manipulator who controlled her father's finances into a defendant facing serious felony charges that would result in prison time and complete financial ruin. The official documentation of elder financial abuse against a military veteran brought immediate attention from law enforcement agencies that take such crimes very seriously. Detective Martinez had seen many cases of family financial abuse, but the scope and systematic nature of Jessica's theft impressed even an experienced investigator. "Mr. Thompson, your daughter has committed multiple felonies over several years," she explained as we reviewed the evidence. "Elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and theft in amounts that qualify for enhanced penalties under state law. The arrest warrant was executed on a Tuesday morning while Jessica was at work at the hospital, a setting that made her crimes even more embarrassing since her co-workers and supervisors witnessed her being taken into custody. The charges included elder financial abuse, fraud, forgery, and organized criminal activity, with bail set at $100,000 due to the large amount of money involved and the systematic nature of the crimes. Mark was arrested at his insurance company office the same day, facing charges as an accessory to elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud. The investigation had revealed his knowledge and participation in spending money they both knew was stolen from Jessica's elderly father. Their luxury lifestyle had been funded by criminal activity, and now both of them were facing the consequences. The local media picked up the story within hours, with headlines about a nurse and her husband who had stolen more than $340,000 from a Vietnam veteran's pension and Social Security benefits. The coverage emphasized the betrayal aspect of the crimes, a daughter systematically stealing from her elderly father while claiming to provide caring assistance during his time of need. The story resonated with the veteran community, and I began receiving calls and letters from other military retirees who had experienced similar financial abuse from family members. The Veterans Administration launched its own investigation into how such systematic theft could occur without detection, leading to improved oversight procedures for pension payments and power of attorney arrangements. Jessica's employer, the Regional Medical Center, where she'd worked for 15 years, placed her on administrative leave pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. Her professional nursing license was also under review by the State Licensing Board, which takes theft convictions very seriously when evaluating fitness to practice in healthcare settings. The criminal case attracted attention from the district attorney's office, which decided to prosecute the charges as felonies with enhanced penalties due to Jessica's targeting of an elderly veteran. The prosecutor assigned to the case had experience with elder abuse prosecutions and understood the broader implications of family financial crimes. Cases like this send a message to other family members who might be tempted to exploit elderly relatives, District Attorney Karen Walsh explained. During a press conference about the charges, "We will prosecute elder abuse to the full extent of the law, especially when the victims are veterans who served our country with honor. The evidence I'd gathered made the prosecution's case incredibly strong." Jessica's own Facebook posts documenting luxury purchases, combined with bank records showing systematic theft over 5 years, created an undeniable pattern of criminal behavior. Her attempts to claim that she'd been providing legitimate financial assistance were contradicted by the overwhelming evidence of personal benefit from stolen funds. The federal government also became involved in the case due to the theft of veterans' benefits, which are federally protected funds. Federal charges were filed alongside state charges, including wire fraud and theft of government benefits, carrying potential sentences that exceeded what state courts could impose. Jessica's attorneys advised her to accept a plea agreement rather than risk trial on charges that carried potential sentences of up to 30 years in combined state and federal prison. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and a jury of veterans and elderly citizens would likely impose maximum penalties for someone who had betrayed such fundamental family responsibilities. The restitution requirements included not only the $340,000 in stolen benefits, but also interest, penalties, and compensation for the emotional distress and loss of dignity I'd suffered during years of financial abuse. The total financial judgment exceeded $400,000, an amount that would require liquidation of all assets Jessica and Mark had purchased with stolen money. The investigation also revealed that Jessica had committed tax fraud by failing to report the stolen money as income, leading to additional charges from the Internal Revenue Service. The luxury lifestyle funded by my pension money had generated tax liabilities that compounded their financial obligations and criminal exposure. As I watched Jessica and Mark led away in handcuffs, I felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction that reminded me of emotions I'd experienced after difficult but necessary combat operations. The sadness came from realizing that someone I'd loved had chosen criminal behavior over family loyalty. The satisfaction came from knowing that justice was being served and that other elderly veterans would be protected from similar exploitation. The restored bank account that gave me control over my own pension money for the first time in 5 years represented more than just financial recovery. It was the return of dignity, independence, and self-respect that Jessica had stolen along with my money. When Patricia Williams from the VA handed me the new bank cards and account information, I felt like a prisoner of war who was finally being liberated from captivity. My monthly pension of $3,847, combined with Social Security benefits of $1,847, provided a total income of $5,694 per month, nearly 6 times the $200 weekly allowance Jessica had been giving me while stealing the rest. For the first time in years, I could afford to live with dignity, rather than scraping by on the financial crumbs my daughter had provided. The court-ordered restitution process resulted in the recovery of $340,000 in stolen benefits, plus interest and penalties that brought the total recovery to more than $400,000. Jessica and Mark were required to liquidate all assets purchased. With stolen money, including their house, cars, boat, and luxury items that had been funded by my pension payments. The sale of their assets was particularly satisfying because it reversed the lifestyle improvements they'd enjoyed while keeping me in poverty. The BMW was repossessed and sold at auction. The kitchen renovation that had consumed more than $40,000 of my stolen money added value to a house they could no longer afford to keep. Mark's boat, purchased with money stolen from a veteran's pension, was sold to help pay restitution to the victim of their crimes. But beyond the financial recovery, the most important outcome was the restoration of my independence and self-determination. I could afford to move to a better apartment, eat nutritious meals, purchase quality clothing, and participate in social activities that had been beyond my reach during the years of Jessica's financial control. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex that catered to active seniors, with amenities like a fitness center, social activities, and transportation services for residents who didn't drive. The rent was under $200 per month, an amount that seemed impossible during the years when I lived on $200 per week, but was easily affordable with my restored income. The first grocery shopping trip with my recovered income was an emotional experience that reminded me of what freedom really means. For years, I'd shopped with careful calculation of every purchase, choosing generic brands and skipping items I wanted but couldn't afford. Now I could buy fresh produce, quality meat, name-brand products, and even small luxuries that made meals enjoyable rather than just sustenance. I also began contributing to veteran organizations and charities that had been beyond my reach during the years of financial abuse. The American Legion, disabled American veterans, and local food banks received donations that represented my restored ability to help others who were struggling with challenges I understood personally. The Veterans Administration used my case as an example in training programs designed to help other elderly veterans recognize and prevent family financial abuse. My experience became part of educational materials that could protect other military retirees from the kind of exploitation I'd suffered for years. Most importantly, the financial recovery allowed me to rebuild social connections and participate in activities that provided purpose and meaning. I joined a veterans discussion group that met weekly at the community center. I began volunteering at the VA hospital, helping other elderly veterans navigate benefit programs and financial assistance options. The restored bank account represented more than just money. It was proof that fighting back against financial abuse could succeed and that elderly veterans didn't have to accept exploitation from family members who saw their benefits as opportunities for personal enrichment. Jessica had assumed that stealing from an elderly father would be a victimless crime with no consequences. Instead, her theft had resulted in felony convictions, financial ruin, and the loss of everything she'd gained through criminal activity. The victim she'd underestimated had proven that some battles are worth fighting, especially when they involve principles of honor, justice, and the protection of benefits earned through military service. The letters from fellow veterans that began, arriving after news coverage of Jessica's prosecution, created a new kind of family for me, a brotherhood of military retirees who understood both the service that earned our benefits and the betrayal that came from having those benefits stolen by people we'd trusted. These men and women had faced similar financial abuse from family members, and my willingness to fight back had inspired them to take action against their own exploiters. Harold Peterson, a Navy veteran from Seattle, wrote about his son who had been stealing his disability payments for 3 years while claiming to help with financial management. "Your story gave me the courage to contact the authorities," Harold wrote. "I thought I was the only veteran dealing with this kind of family betrayal, but now I realize we're not alone in this fight." Margaret Stevens, a retired Army nurse from Georgia, described how her daughter-in-law had been intercepting her pension checks and giving her a small monthly allowance while claiming the money was needed for professional financial management. Margaret had contacted legal aid attorneys after reading about my case and was now pursuing criminal charges against the family member who had been stealing her benefits. The veteran community's response to my story created a network of mutual support that replaced the family relationships Jessica had destroyed through her crimes. These men and women understood the unique challenges of military service and the honor that came with earning veteran benefits through sacrifice and dedication to duty. I began corresponding regularly with veterans who were fighting similar battles against family financial abuse. We shared strategies for gathering evidence, recommendations for attorneys who specialized in elder abuse cases, and emotional support for dealing with the betrayal that came from having family members steal money earned through military service. The American Legion post in my area invited me to speak at their monthly meeting about recognizing and preventing family financial abuse. My presentation drew an audience of more than 60 veterans, many of whom shared stories about their own experiences with financial exploitation by children, grandchildren, and other relatives who saw veteran benefits as family resources rather than individual earned benefits. "The hardest part isn't the money," said Frank Morrison, a Korean War veteran whose grandson had been forging his signature on benefit checks. "It's realizing that people you love and trust see you as a source of income rather than a family member who deserves respect." The Veterans Organization also connected me with social activities and friendship opportunities that had been beyond my reach during the years of financial abuse. Weekly poker games, monthly dinners, holiday celebrations, and group trips to veteran events provided the social connections that Jessica's control over my finances had made impossible. I also became involved in advocacy efforts to strengthen legal protections for elderly veterans and improve oversight of benefit payments. My case had highlighted weaknesses in systems that were supposed to prevent financial abuse, and veteran organizations were working with lawmakers to close loopholes that allowed family members to exploit elderly military retirees. The relationships I built with other veterans created a chosen family based on shared values of honor, service, and mutual support. These men and women understood that military benefits were earned through sacrifice, and that stealing those benefits was a betrayal not just of individual veterans, but of the principles that military service represented. Most importantly, the veteran community provided validation that fighting back against family financial abuse was not only appropriate, but necessary to protect other elderly veterans from similar exploitation. My willingness to prosecute Jessica had sent a message that veteran benefits were protected by law and that theft would face serious consequences regardless of family relationships. The letters from fellow veterans represented more than just correspondence. They were evidence that standing up for principle could inspire others to fight for justice. Jessica's crimes had cost me my relationship with my biological family, but they'd also led me to a community of brothers and sisters who understood the values she'd never learned and the honor she'd chosen to betray. The new will I signed it. The Law Office of Elder Rights Legal Services represents the final victory in my war against Jessica's financial abuse, a legal document that ensures my legacy will honor the values she betrayed, rather than rewarding the crimes she committed against someone who served his country with honor. The will directs my estate to veteran organizations and charities rather than to the daughter who saw my military pension as her personal income source. 2 years after Jessica's conviction and imprisonment for elder financial abuse, I'm living in comfort and dignity with my restored pension benefits while she serves a 7-year sentence in state prison for crimes that destroyed not only my financial security, but also the family relationships I'd once treasured. The money she stole has been recovered. The lifestyle she built on theft has been liquidated, and the professional reputation she'd built through 15 years of nursing has been permanently destroyed. My new will specifically excludes Jessica and her family from any inheritance, with detailed explanations about the criminal activities that disqualified them from benefiting from the estate of someone they'd systematically robbed. The document serves as both a legal barrier against future financial abuse and a statement about the consequences of betraying family trust and veteran benefits. Instead, my estate will benefit organizations that serve elderly veterans and prevent the kind of financial abuse I experienced. The disabled American veterans, veterans of foreign wars, and local legal aid programs that assist elderly military retirees will receive the assets that Jessica assumed would eventually belong to her and her children. The irony isn't lost on me that Jessica's theft, which was motivated by greed and the desire for immediate financial benefit, ultimately cost her and her family far more than they could have gained through legitimate inheritance. Her crimes resulted in felony convictions, financial ruin, loss of professional licensing, and permanent exclusion from the estate she'd been systematically looting. My work with other veterans who've experienced family financial abuse has become a source of purpose and meaning that transcends the pain of Jessica's betrayal. I've testified in legislative hearings about strengthening legal protections for elderly veterans, spoken at veteran organization meetings about recognizing financial abuse warning signs, and assisted dozens of military retirees in pursuing legal action against family members who stole their benefits. The advocacy work has connected me with lawmakers, attorneys, and veteran service organizations who understand that protecting military retirement benefits requires vigilance against both external fraud and internal family exploitation. My case has contributed to legislative changes that make it harder for family members to gain control over veteran benefits, and easier for elderly military retirees to recover stolen funds. Most importantly, I've learned that real family isn't defined by blood relationships, but by shared values, mutual respect, and the willingness to support each other through difficult times. The veteran community has provided the loyalty and brotherhood that Jessica destroyed through her crimes, proving that chosen families can be stronger and more meaningful than biological relationships that are corrupted by greed and exploitation. Jessica chose to see my military pension as an opportunity for personal enrichment rather than recognition of service and sacrifice that deserved respect and protection. Her theft reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of what veteran benefits represent and why they're protected by law as earned compensation rather than family resources. The new will ensures that my legacy will serve veterans who understand honor, service, and sacrifice, rather than rewarding someone who betrayed those values for personal financial gain. Jessica's children, innocent of their mother's crimes, will learn from family, friends, and community members about the grandfather they never really knew and the military service that earned benefits their mother chose to steal. My final victory in this battle isn't just the recovery of stolen money or Jessica's conviction for elder abuse. It's the knowledge that my story has helped protect other elderly veterans from similar exploitation and strengthened legal safeguards for military benefits earned through honorable service. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not on foreign battlefields, but in defense of principles that define who we are and what we stand for. The warrior who survived 3 tours in Vietnam has won his final campaign, not through violence, but through courage, persistence, and the refusal to accept defeat when fighting for justice. Jessica thought she was exploiting a helpless old man, but she discovered that some soldiers never stop fighting, especially when they're defending honor earned through blood, sacrifice, and service to something greater than themselves.